Welcome back, Sebastian here. So today, of course, Christmas. So today I wanted to do kind of a silly little video discussing what does each team want for Christmas. So we'll go through all 10 F1 teams in reverse championship order for this year. And just hypothetically, if they could have a Christmas present, what would they want, or what's one thing that I think that they should want? Of course, it would be very easy to say, oh, I want all my drivers to be performing at a very, very high level. I want the fastest car possible for 2025, but that would be a little bit too easy. So we're going to go a little bit, try a little bit harder than that, although one of them does have driver performance involved. All right, so getting started right away with number 10, Sauber. So for number 10, Sauber, 10th in the Constructors, dead last year. I've decided to go with low speed cornering performance. And I think the reason why I've done that is because I think that's the one area where the car struggled the most in 2024. If you go and look at the qualifying times at Monaco, for example, they were absolutely horrific. There are many tracks where there's low speed corners. They generally tend to struggle quite a bit as well. And the one track where they scored points 2024 was, let's see, what was that? Qatar. And they actually did, a pretty good job there. All things considered, and that is a track which doesn't have a whole lot of slow speed corners. So I think that's probably the thing that's been ailing them the most, and that's something I definitely think they could do with in 2025. All right, moving up to Williams, I think this is a pretty self-explanatory one. The one thing that the Williams team will want more than anything next year is less crashes. Lots of crashes this past year between Albon, Sargent, and Colapinto. I think all three of them finished in the top 5 or 6 drivers in the Destructors Championship, if you know what that is. It's this fellow on Reddit who likes to basically, keep track every week of, how much crash damage every driver's caused. And the Williams drivers, all three of them were actually very, very high on that list. So again, it will be interesting to see with Sainz coming in next year, if that's a characteristic of the car, or if it's just that for whatever reason, those 3 drivers were just a little bit more crash prone than your average driver. But again, it will be interesting to see next year how that plays out. But nonetheless, for Williams, that's the one thing that I think they'll want more than anything in next year: less crashes. Moving on to RB. For RB, quite a mixed bag of a team, but for the one thing that I decided for them was better race day strategies. Many races where their drivers, be it Tsunoda, Ricciardo, or Lawson, would qualify pretty well, have a really good Saturday, and then it would all just come to nothing on Sunday, as the team would decide to keep them out 5 laps later than they should, put them on some strange alternative strategy that then only works if a safety car comes out. I remember that happened to Lawson in Vegas, I believe. And again, I think it was just something that was consistently hurting them throughout the season. So that's something that hopefully can be fixed next year. But I feel like, unfortunately, for the Faenza team, that's been an issue of theirs for many, many years now. So I'm not sure how likely that is to be fixed anytime soon. Moving on to Haas, I've decided to go with less dependent on Ferrari. And the reason I say this is not because necessarily it's a bad strategy. It's obviously a very, very cost-effective strategy for the team to use as many Ferrari parts as possible. But as we've seen with some years, 2023, 2019, when they use the same rear suspension, use the same gearbox as Ferrari, it can cause them to have absolutely massive issues with their tires and the fact that they don't understand the car because, of course, they don't make the parts. They're just taking the parts from Ferrari. So I think for Haas, if they really want to ever be a team that can consistently fight, not necessarily at the front, but I would say upper midfield consistently, even being where Aston Martin is right now, as much as that's kind of a step down for where they were at the start of 2023, I think that would at least be, a decent position, constantly being front of best of the rest, so to speak. And of course, with Toyota kind of increasing their involvement with the Haas team, perhaps, that can allow them to kind of separate themselves a little bit more from Ferrari and hopefully, at the end of the day, produce a better, more consistent car from year to year. Number 6, Alpine. I'm going to go with stability in management. This is a team that has had 18 team, or not 18 team principals. They've had 3, that would be quite something. They've had 3 team principals in 18 months, which of course in F1 is definitely not a good thing. If you look at the most successful F1 teams, be it Red Bull, be it Mercedes, they generally have had their team principals for a very, very long time, and that upper management is generally, there's a lot of continuity there. Christian Horner's been at Red Bull for 20 years. Toto Wolff, he's been at Mercedes for 10 years. And again, in that time period, Horner's won 8 drivers' championships, 6 constructors' championships, and for Wolff, won, 7 drivers' championships and 8 constructors' championships. So of course, 2 of the most successful team principals in F1 history. And I do think that the continuity does have a part to play. And of course, it's kind of a chicken and the egg situation where the continuity is because of the success, but I think the team's success is also partially because they're at least able to have a consistent vision. And we've seen with Alpine the constant 100 race plans that were being constantly updated every 2 to 3 years as a new person became CEO of the Renault Group or the Alpine F1 division, how things with the goalposts were constantly changing. I think, of course, with them not being a engine manufacturer anymore from 2026, there's going to be less influence from kind of the Renault French side of things in theory. I don't know how much that will affect things, but at least it means that the chassis department, the Enstone team, can't just blame the engine department for everything like they've done the last couple of years. So I do think if Oliver Ost can kind of get things right the ship, kind of build a consistent team direction, I think it can really help them going forward. All right, moving on to the top 5 teams and starting up with 5th in the constructors, Aston Martin. And for Aston, I've decided to go with upgrades, not downgrades. And this has been a consistent problem for the team the last 2 years. They start the year fairly well. I think, both 2023 and 2024, they started fairly well, all things considered. But unfortunately, as the season went along, as teams brought upgrades, Aston Martin's upgrades actually made them slower. So they actually turned into downgrades. And this is something that I think indicates that they don't really understand their car that well. And they perhaps don't understand the complexities of the ground effect regulations, which is something that has definitely hampered a number of teams the last 3 years. Moving on to Mercedes, I'm going to go with a bigger operating window. It's pretty clear to see the last 3 years or so that Mercedes, when they are able to get their car into their perfect operating window, they can sometimes be the fastest car on track. Unfortunately for the team, those days are far and few between. And it's something that if they want to be able to fight for a title anytime soon, it's something that they really need to get on top of. They wasted 3 years of Russell and Hamilton, arguably the strongest driver lineup at the time over those 3 years. And they did waste what was kind of, a pretty good car, in a way, given that, it was actually able to compete at such a high level on the days where the team was able to actually figure out what the correct setup was. And of course, temperature also played a big role this past season. Many of their victories, with the exception of Austria, which of course there was quite a bit of luck involved in that, happened on, I think, three of the 4 or 5 coldest races this past season. So it definitely shows that, temperature is a bit of a factor there as well. Moving on to Red Bull. So this is kind of the one where I think I've decided to put driver performance. I could have put, upgrades, or I could have put bigger operating windows similar to Aston or Mercedes. But I think for Red Bull, what really sunk them this past year was the fact that Perez was just not giving them consistent point scoring finishes that he needed to. And that really cost the team in a big way in the Constructors' Championship. So obviously massive responsibility on the shoulders of young Liam Lawson, starting his first full season in F1. And I think even in a way more so than Antonelli, despite the fact that Antonelli's going to have a lot more hype and attention put on him given his young age and the fact that he's kind of a true rookie and kind of his junior results as well. But I think because, Red Bull, we know that their car this year was very, very good. Not obviously not quite as dominant as the last 2 years, but still Verstappen was able to win the Drivers' Championship. Assuming they kind of understand, where things went wrong and they can kind of correct those mistakes, I do think that they're going to be very competitive next year as well. And as a result, I think the expectations are going to be very high on Lawson. So if he can perform, let's say he can perform at 2022 Perez levels, I think that would be a really good target for his first year. I think Red Bull would be very happy. All right, now moving on to Ferrari, and I've decided to put consistency down. So for Ferrari, there were points this year, the first quarter of the season, last quarter of the season. Of course, this is kind of spoilers for the season review that's going to be coming out, I think, tomorrow or the next couple of days. But Ferrari were a very inconsistent team this past year, and that's something that's kind of plagued them for several years now. There will be days where things just go absolutely, completely wrong. Canada, for Leclerc, I think comes to mind with the engine issues, strategy mistakes at Silverstone that ended up with Leclerc finishing 2 laps down. But when things work perfectly well, they can end up with, a 1-2, for example. So, I think it's really for Ferrari, if they want to be able to challenge for the Constructors' Championship, unless they have a massive car advantage next year, which I wouldn't put big money on. I think they're really gonna have to work on the race-to-race consistency. Now, for number 1, McLaren, this is similar to Ferrari's in a way, but I've decided to go with race day execution. McLaren were a very, very fast car this year, and basically from the Miami upgrades onwards, Miami, of course, is where Lando Norris won his first one, and that kind of was really the turning point of the 2024 F1 season. But for McLaren, I think race day execution is going to be a big factor for them if they want to be able to win the Drivers' Championship next year. If Red Bull have a car that is anywhere close to as capable as it was for the last couple races this year, so like Qatar level performance, I would say, then, that's going to be a massive challenge for McLaren, as I feel the team threw away too many points through poor strategy decision. I think there were some mistakes as well from their drivers. Lando Norris made a couple mistakes here and there, not a ton, but I think the team also made its fair share of mistakes. Silverstone, I think, comes to mind. That was a win that they kind of threw away. Spa as well, that was a weekend they really should have won. And even a race like Qatar, where, with all those high-speed corners, that was a track that had McLaren written all over it, and unfortunately they didn't get the win there. So I think for McLaren, if they want to win the Constructors, of course, that's something that they did this year. Having a very, very fast car is definitely going to be important, and they have 2 very, very strong, capable drivers, and that makes it, I think, easier for them than it does for example, Mercedes or Red Bull right now. But I think if they want to be able to win the Constructors, win the Drivers, win the Constructors, I think, with more ease than they did this year, and then also win the Drivers in 2025, having race day execution, being able to convert those pole positions a bit more consistently into race wins, that was definitely something that Norris struggled with for much of the season race starts. If they can get all those things together, I think they should have a very, very strong 2025 F1 season. So there you go. There are my 10 things, my 10 gifts that I think all 10 F1 teams would like for Christmas this year. Things that will help them do it for the 2025 F1 season. So there you go. That's all for this video. Merry Christmas to everyone, and I'll be back in a couple of days with the last 2 videos of the year, my McLaren and my Ferrari team reviews. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Goodbye.